Yep. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Mavens Do It Better podcast, where we interview extraordinary experts who bring a light to our world. And I have a wonderful Maven on today, Jerry Palm. Hello.
Hi, nice to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you too. Jerry, where are you coming from today?
My basement, my former swinging bachelor pad, but I'm getting married at the beginning of September, so bachelor is no longer going to apply. But the basement of my home in the region in Northwest Indiana, which is suburban Chicago. Really, I've spent suburban Chicago all my life. The last 25 years on this side of the state line, and
Yeah.
most of the rest of my life on the other side. But yeah.
Yeah, fellow Midwesterner. I grew up in Michigan, Indiana, and Illinois as well, as you know. So yeah, I swear, I feel like I have more Midwesterners on here than anything else. Actually. We seem to find each other wherever we are in the world. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm pretty deeply rooted here now.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, so Jerry has such a cool job, and I wanted to get him on the podcast to talk about it. And so, Jerry, will you tell everybody what you do?
Yeah, how much time you got?
Well, we'll see. Let's do it.
I'm the short version is I'm a sports writer, and I cover college football and basketball, but I have kind of a different niche area of expertise than everybody else. In basketball, my primary function is to predict who will make the NCAA basketball tournament, and in football, it's to predict who's going to go to all the various bowl games, but obviously focused in recent years on the BCS and the college football playoff. And, then the postseason starts, and obviously I'll pick those games too, but really the focus is trying to predict who's going to get there. And I've been doing this since I started with basketball in 1994, so that makes it a long time, and I'm old. But it's a weird gig. I mean, nobody does everything that I do. There's number crunching involved. There's behavior analysis involved. There are people who do bits and pieces of what I do, but nobody does everything that I do. And I do some more traditional game coverage kinds of things as well. But it's not really the primary part of my job.
Right. So we talked and I've seen things, I've read about you, doing my research and all that stuff. So it's you're a bracketologist.
Yeah, that's really one of my least favorite words.
Oh, it is. Oh,
yeah,
no.
No, that's okay. I mean, everybody calls me that, so you get used to it. But and it's an ESPN creation because the guy who started all of this, and really the year before I did, was Joe Lenardi at ES, and he's still at ESPN, and so ESPN came up with that word, and ESPN being the Godzilla of sports broadcasting, everybody now uses that word. I always think it sounds grossly medical. Like if you've got a friend who comes to you and says, I saw my bracketologist today, you're thinking two things. Oh my God, I hope you're okay. And please don't tell me any details. So, that's a word that, I mean, I haven't got a better one necessarily.
Right.
And that's the word that everybody uses. So I just roll with it, of course. But yeah, I've never been a big fan of that word.
Right. Gotcha. All right. Well, everyone strike bracketologist from your memory on this one. But yeah, so you have to have sort of a mind. I mean, obviously so much about sports, and you keep all of that stuff in your brain, right? I mean, years and years and years. And it's math too, right? I mean, you're doing a lot.
Yes, absolutely. Well, my background was computer science. I mean, that was my major at Purdue.
Okay.
I was a flaming math geek in high school. I was a state champion in math in high school.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, it was just, just one of those things that's my niche. And so the job that I have now, there's data that is used by the committees that pick the playoffs and the bowls and all of that in both of these sports. And so there's a science to it, but the data, all these rankings of the teams and all of that don't make the decisions. The committees make the decisions. Right. They're guided by the data, but it's still a subjective process. So I always say the job is as much art as it is science. And in a way, it's behavioral analysis because I'm trying to predict what this 10-person committee is going to do with this set of data based on what they've done in the past with similar data. But, there's new members on the committee every year. That the data isn't always, the comparisons between teams aren't always the same. So there's a fair amount of guesswork in it, but I like to think of it, at least, especially in basketball, as educated guesswork.
Mm.
Football, they have less data to work with. It's much more subjective. It could be even more so this year because of COVID and the way it's messing with football schedules. But
Right.
yeah, it's and the fact that once you get outside the playoffs, the other bowls merit has almost nothing to do with who gets picked.
What does it have to do with?
TV matchups, who's going to bring the most fans. You have to have a certain record to be considered for a bowl game. There is a minimum standard. Otherwise, Notre Dame could go 3-9 and every bowl would still want them because they're Notre Dame. So,
Right.
there are some minimum standards, but and then there's conferences contract with the other bowls. So, I'm a Purdue guy, Big Ten guy. The Big Ten has got contracts with certain bowls. So Big Ten teams, if they have enough eligible, are going to go to all of these games. So you can nail it down to a conference or two, but you can't always nail down the team because it has nothing to do with how well you did in your league.
Right, I gotcha. So for how you do this stuff, so we have because I work in technology as well, we have a lot of folks who listen who are technologists and also artists as well. So we've got sort of both sides to it, and wondering I'm curious about sort of what technology do you use? Is this like Excel spreadsheets? Is it in a Power BI? How do you do the crunch? Or are you taking a pencil
it's
to a
funny. Yeah, it's funny because I got into it to sort of teach myself some technology. Back in '94, I had just gotten my first PC. Al Gore had just invented the internet. They had just changed the RPI formula for basketball. That was the ranking system that they used for the longest time, up until a couple of years ago, to help them with the selection process. And so I had this new computer, too much time on my hands. I had an Access database.
Oh, yeah.
And so I went and I chased down, I wanted to duplicate this RPI. And I went to the library and got, newspapers because, this is back before every school had a website and you could just go find scores easily and download them even. So it was a lot of, hand entering of data, which actually I still do. It's like part of my editing process to hand enter scores into my database. And I'm still using Access to this day, although a newer version of it.
Wow.
And then I would download flat files to my computer. I had Perl scripts that I wrote to generate static pages and scripts on the website to generate pages on the fly. And I had a website, collegerpi.com, for the longest time up until 2011 when it was really 2012, I think, when CBS bought me out. And so I became a full-time CBS employee. But really, I was on my own for almost 20 years, trying to first a hobby and then trying to make a living at it.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. How cool is that? So what's it like to work at CBS?
No, it's great. The people I work with are really good. They give me the freedom to do things the way I need to do them. They're generally good people that I work with, dedicated to trying to do their jobs correctly, help me do my job correctly. And it's been one of the real benefits for me is that CBS is the rights holder for the basketball tournament. So that gives me a little more access, not only to games and things, but to the selection committee for basketball, because we interact with them more than other networks do because of that we show the selection show. So it's been very helpful, and it's been great. CBS people have been really good to me.
That's so cool. And so pre-COVID, obviously, is it that you were flying you go to New York a lot for that kind of stuff? Or were you going on kind of all over the place? Or what was your, like?
So for the selection stuff, Selection Sunday is usually about the second Sunday or maybe the third in March. And then the tournament follows the next 3 weeks. But Selection Sunday, and usually it's really been more. I was in New York for almost 2 weeks before COVID hit.
Right.
It's about my longest time away from home just for work. I got out of New York on the Friday of the 13th, which was 2 days before Selection Sunday, which obviously never happened this season. So I'll be out there doing a lot of television for CBS or CBS Sports Network. And also I'll do videos on the CBS Sports HQ, or online streaming service, which I have a studio in my basement to do that, but we also have studios in Connecticut where we broadcast from. So for those 2 weeks, I kind of go back and forth between New York City and Stamford, Connecticut. And I'm usually out in New York once in February as well for basketball.
Yeah, I know. We watched you with your. It was like, it was so fascinating because I'm a sports fan, but I'm not like a super duper sports fan. But it was so interesting to watch you and the banter between all of you talking about the different teams and stuff. It was really fun to check that out this year. But
yeah, I have a kind of a weird job in that I kind of put the geek in sports geek, but when I'm on television, I can't really geek it up too much because people's eyes will glaze over. So there's kind of a fine line between making sure people understand what the committee cares about with these teams and yet not boring them to tears.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that makes sense to me. So, so where are you from exactly in the Midwest?
I've been around Chicago all my life.
Yeah.
South suburbs, Northwest Indiana suburbs, a few years up in the north suburbs. Let's see, I'm 56 years old, so I'd say 50 years in the Chicago area, 4 years at Purdue, 1 in Hawaii when I was a little kid, and a couple other places we bounced around when my dad was early in his career, but pretty much Chicago all my life.
Yeah. Have you been to Lake Tippecanoe? Have we talked about this?
You mean the battleground?
No, well, Lake Tippecanoe, Lake Tippecanoe, like by Muncie and Anderson, kind of up.
Oh no, I mean my ex is from Anderson, so I've been to Anderson a lot, but no, I haven't been to what you're talking about. The Tippecanoe, there's a Tippecanoe battleground area in Tippecanoe County is where West Lafayette and Purdue is.
Yeah.
But no, I haven't been to that area.
Okay, yeah, I actually lived in Anderson for formative years growing up.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you go to high school there?
No, I left right before high school. So I was at, East Side Middle School is where I went.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, sure. I know where that is.
Yeah. And I went to Philbuck Elementary and I was supposed to go to Highland High, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. My ex went to Anderson. So we went to some of you would know obviously about Indiana high school basketball and what, so Anderson used to play in the Wigwam, which is a 9,000 seat gym, and they would fill it. And one of the best high school game I ever saw was in that gym. It was just, it's like being at a pro game, except for more exciting. Really, it's more like being at a college game. Yeah. Because the pro games have a different atmosphere. But it was that was a unique time in that town.
Yeah, absolutely. But it makes sense, like with what you do and your love of like the technology, but also sports. It's like, gosh, the Midwest is so rich for all of that. When like I think I told you that what my uncle's passed away now, but one of my uncles played in the NFL.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Dennis Rogowski, and he played for the Patriots and the Eagles in the early 70s, and then just watching Purdue, and he went to Purdue. Two of my uncles went to Purdue actually, and so they both played football for Purdue, and which makes Wade very happy, which is how we've met. Boiler up. But then like watching. Like my years growing up was watching Bobby Knight and all of that stuff and the chairs and everything else. Watching those things.
The chair happened when I was at Purdue. That's one of those events that I remember where I was when Bob Knight threw the chair.
Yeah.
I was gathered in the dorm room of a friend of ours and watching the game, and Bob picks up the chair and throws it, and we're just like, oh wow, that's ridiculous even by Bob Knight standards. I mean, that was exactly. That was a pretty seminal event in our college years. Bob Knight throwing the chair. That was as you mentioned. I mean, obviously, I have a great appreciation for sports, and I cover college football and basketball. Baseball was my first love, but there was no better theater in college basketball than the 25 years when Gene Cady was coaching Purdue and Bob Knight was at Indiana, and it was just. Those two on the sidelines together and the level of competition of those games was just insane.
Absolutely. It was theater. I mean, it was one of the, I mean, we always watched it. I mean, it was one of those where, and in the Midwest, you watched it. I mean, it was like, we watched the Bears games and had the Brats and that whole thing, and then the Cubs and everything else. But yeah, but those college games, man, they're so rah, and so fun. Yeah. So yeah, that's super cool. So when you've got the computer, but like, what was that moment or that spark when everything where you were like, this is what I want to do, and you started that business and stuff? Was it like
it evolved
an aha moment? What happened?
I did it for my own edification. I wanted to learn how to use a PC, at home. I mean, I had a computers at work, but
Right.
I wanted to learn this new database. I wanted to learn Perl. I wanted to learn web publishing. I was doing it really to improve my skills for stuff that I could use in my career as a programmer.
Right.
And it was, I never thought anybody would care about this. So I got the data together for the RPI in early 1994,
Right.
the late in the basketball season, but early in the calendar year.
Mm.
And I started sharing it on news groups, which is the caveman writing on the wall version of message boards that we have
Sure.
now.
Right.
And I really thought, fewer people than would fit comfortably in my minivan would care.
Yeah. Right.
And people started asking me for daily updates and emailing stuff to them. And I wasn't going to be able to do all that.
Right.
But then, the next year I created a web page for it on AOL when AOL gave us at
Oh,
that time a one-page website that we could use with our account.
Yep.
And then the next year I created collegerpi.com because people cared,
Yeah.
but I never thought it was going to be a thing.
Yeah.
And this is actually kind of the miracle of my story. If I had gone into a bank in 1994 and said, hey, I need a loan to start this business, and I'm gonna get started and try and build up a little word of mouth audience. But the thing I'm really gonna need to have happen for this to blow up is for Penn State to be good in basketball, because that happens once a generation. But as it turns out, one of those years was, I want to say it's 96, and the guy who covered Penn State, actually still covers Penn State, found what I was doing, called me, emailed. He likes me. He tells two friends. They tell two friends. Shampoo commercial breaks out. Next thing you know, everybody covering college basketball knew who I was,
Wow.
and I couldn't have stopped it.
Right.
It was just, I could have turned off my phone, gotten a fetal position under my desk. They'd have probably broken in my house because sports writers are persistent. So it was just, but that's kind of when I knew that, there was going to be a larger audience for this than I would have ever anticipated when I started doing this. And then, next thing you know, I get downsized from my job in 2002, went on March 1st of all things, went to the Final Four that year. And by then I had a pretty good network of sports writer friends, guys that I had talked to a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And went and asked them, I said, so how would you feel about if I took this website and made it a subscription thing? Do you think that I would be able to get enough subscribers to keep this afloat? And they said, yeah, you probably ought to give that a go. So I did.
Wow.
And so I had a subscription-based website.
Okay.
I was one of the first people in the media to make money on the internet, except, like porn media, but, but
porn has innovated a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything innovates through them, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that from 2002 until CBS bought me out almost 10 years later.
Wow.
And it was a surreal journey. I never planned any of it. I never self-promoted. I'm terrible at that.
Mm-hmm.
But people found me because I was doing something nobody else was doing. So so by pioneering, in a sense, I guess I was self-promoting. Mm-hmm. But I wasn't thinking of it that way at the time. It's only looking back on it that I thought, I guess I pioneered this, and I kind of pioneered that. And I'm doing things that nobody else ever did.
Right.
But I wasn't doing it to do with that. I was doing it because it was a fun thing to do. And I was, in a sense, I was following my passion, which, is probably the most important thing I think people can do, because you're never going to be happy if you don't. Yeah. But I wasn't doing it for a vocation. It was an avocation that turned into a vocation.
Right. That's super cool. So is for you growing up, were there people like for you for sports, was it like people you were like, oh my gosh, like did you then get sort of starstruck with sports figures and now and all of that?
Yeah. I mean, I was a Chicago guy, right? Yeah, so Cubs fan, but one of those rare birds that actually rooted for both teams. But the first year that I remember baseball was 1969. Wow. So, the Cubs got off to this great start and then they collapsed, and that pretty much set me up as a Cubs fan for life. But the rest of my family was Sox fans. So we went to a ton of games at Comiskey Park as well. And so I would root for them too. In fact, I got to go to Disco Demolition Night, which is a funny story.
Tell me about that. Okay.
So Disco Demolition Night, for those of you who are not from Chicago, a DJ in Chicago this is 1979, had arranged with the White Sox to do Disco Demolition Night to blow up records in center field, disco records. If you brought a disco record, you got in for 99 cents. He was the most popular DJ in town. Wow. The place was packed. and they were playing the Tigers, the Sox were. So after the first game, he comes out in a tank. They've got this enormous box of records in center field. They blow it up, but people are now climbing the fence from the outside to get into the stadium. They storm the field. They set a fire. There's a fire in center field. The game is unplayable. People are throwing record shards around. We got there. We got there late, so we had some of the last seats in the ballpark. We were out by the center field scoreboard, way up in the upper deck, and but record shards were being thrown around up there. I don't even know how they got up there, but yeah, we were ducking for cover. And then the second game got canceled and eventually forfeited. And easily the most unique event I've ever been to is Disco Demolition Night.
Wow. Well, and that was sort of it wasn't sort of, it was a seminal moment in music, and also a seminal moment, I think, for just the 70s too, right?
Yeah, it was. Oh, yeah. And the 40th anniversary was last year. And, I don't know how much play it gets outside of Chicago because I'm rarely outside of Chicago to gauge that. But, around here, it's a legendary event in Chicago sports history, Chicago radio history, music history. I mean, locally, it's an epic event.
Yeah, anything on disco I've ever seen, any documentaries and all that stuff like that, that boom, is always in it, and it talks about how it's like the end of this sort of era of also Studio 54 and a lot of sort of like other cultural sort of movements of free love and all that kind of stuff that really sort of put the end of that in us going into the 80s. And also, gosh, it's like, yeah, I mean, I grew up in the Midwest too, obviously, like we've been talking about, so I knew about it, but I think also I love disco music. Like my family, I went to hustle lessons with my parents at the Y, so like disco and all of that and learning the hustle was a big part of my life growing up in the Midwest. So
yeah, see, I was the complete opposite. I was totally on the Death to Disco bandwagon, and I was more of a rocker,
Right.
and this station was the rock and roll station in town, So anyways, it was just, I mean, I wasn't, like religious about, the disco thing, but it's just, it didn't entertain me at all. So I would much rather listen to Queen, ELO, Styx, stuff like that. Still, Queen's still my favorite band, but
absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about Queen, because it's a favorite of mine too. And you also just said another favorite of mine. I love ELO as well. So
yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Talk to me about your love of Queen. When did you hear them? And did you see Freddie?
I did.
Oh my gosh.
So a buddy of mine who was a year behind me in high school got a night at the opera, invited me over. We listened to it. I mean, I had heard a couple of Queen songs, back then, but, hadn't really latched on. But that album was so good. Yeah. And we probably listened to it, listen to one side, flip it over, listen to the other, probably listen to it back, front to back 3 times that night. And I was hooked. I mean, the variety of musical styles on that album, the fact that they could do it as well as they did. Nobody sings like Freddie. But it's not just Freddie. Brian May on guitar, the virtuoso, Roger Taylor, the drummer, John Deacon, the bass. I mean, just solid. All 4 wrote hit songs, number 1 songs that, throughout the course of their career. But I got to see Queen with Freddie in Chicago after the Hot Space album, when they were touring for that, which it turned out was their last American tour. We didn't know it at the time, but it turned out to be their last American tour. They were fantastic. Their act is always really tight when they perform. But then, so I also saw them with Paul Rodgers when they toured with him, and Paul was, he's a great rock singer with Free and Bad Company, but he doesn't have the chops to sing all of what Queen does. And now I've seen him 3 times with Adam Lambert. And if you ever get a chance to see him with Adam Lambert, oh my gosh, is he good? And he's vocally, he's got the range that Freddie had. He might even have more range, and he's got a powerful voice. And he can sing all of it, and he can sing it well. But his voice is unique. He's got like this inherent vibrato that's really pretty cool, and he's absolutely flamboyant enough to front this band. It's a great show with Adam Lambert. It's they really do it justice, and what's great about it especially is it's kept the music alive for another generation, and it's and then you get the Bohemian Rhapsody movie, which I loved, obviously, and it's been fun to watch, and these guys are still going.
Yeah.
It's great. I'll go see them again. We saw them in New Orleans in August, and I
Oh,
would go back to see them again if I get a chance.
yeah, absolutely. That's on my list for sure. Yeah, and it's just all the, it's all the records and songs, but it's all the soundtracks too. It's like Highlander and Flash
Yeah,
Gordon.
yeah.
I was just talking about Flash Gordon that I love so much. Like it's such good music. And it's great that Adam Lambert, that they've done that, that they've actually had somebody come in and actually keep that music alive. Not everybody
Well, it's hard to find somebody
Yeah.
who can sing everything Freddie sings.
Yeah. Right.
It's
Yeah.
the range, the power, the finesse, all of it.
Yeah.
Adam can do all of that, and
Yeah.
that's actually when he worked with Queen on American Idol is the first. Oh, I hardly ever watched that show, but I watched it when Queen was on it, and
Right.
when he was working with them, it's like that
Right.
kid might be, if they ever decide to go that way, that kid might be able to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, passions of technology and sports and music, we're also well-rounded as people. I know you're in the Purdue band. Will you talk about that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's does call me a musician is really stretching the definition of musician. I had checkered history with instruments. I started on clarinet in middle school and first year of high school, but then my clarinet went in the shop and I switched to bass clarinet. Okay. But they wouldn't let me march my bass clarinet. So I had marched cymbals for 2 years in high school, and the cymbals were heavier than I was. I should tell you, I was 4'11" when I started high school and maybe 80 pounds.
What?
And I grew 13 inches in high school and another inch at Purdue.
Oh my gosh.
So I was 6'1" and 125 when I graduated Purdue.
Wow.
So when I talk about the cymbals being heavier than me, I'm not just whistling Dixie here. I mean, that's those things were heavy.
Right.
But I finally got to march my bass clarinet my senior year because all the low brass graduated. But then when I went to Purdue, and really, honestly, I was born at Purdue. My parents were in school at the time. I'm a born and bred Boilermaker, and I was going to go to Purdue if they were any good at what I wanted to study, and they were an elite computer science school, so that was not a problem. But I wanted to be in the marching band. I was never going to be an athlete. I wanted to be in the marching band because we would go to games. I would stick around for the halftime shows.
Sure.
But now I'm going to clarinet. I have to audition on an instrument I haven't played in 4 years. And I'm not that great a musician anyway. But I got in the band. I was an alternate. And then my freshman year, so I got on the field a few times, but not all the time. And then my sophomore year, or the summer after that, the same friend who introduced me to Queen was a sax player. And he was graduating high school, wasn't going to play in college, so he gave me a saxophone. And I marched that, and I've been playing that ever since. Still played bass clarinet indoors. And then 1 year on contrabass clarinet, which is basically a bell and a mouthpiece and 6 miles of plumbing in between. That might actually have been heavier than me.
Right.
But anyways, so yeah, anything with a single reed I can hack at and get a sound out of. So Purdue marching band, that was what kept me sane through college. It was that's where so many of my friends from school are. So many of my best friends to this day, the people that I'm in touch with from Purdue, I either know from the alumni club or the band. And my first wife was I met in the band. My future wife was a pledge sister with my ex in the band sorority. So I knew her back then too.
Wow.
So anyways, the band has had a lot of influence on my life, both in just being able to get through the rigors of Purdue, plus the friendships that still exist to this day. Gosh, what's it, 35 years? A long time.
Yeah. And seeing you all together a few times, and like just how you care about each other is super cool. It's like my friends from college, from my theater days, are some of my closest friends in the entire world. So I get you.
It's definitely, band has always been a family. My kids have all been in marching band in high school. My number 2 son marched at Purdue.
Okay.
So and that particular year when he marched, we had alumni band that year, so we got to share the field with him, and that was a really special moment.
Yeah, that's super cool. And so tell everybody where alumni bands play, like how that works when we're gathering.
So at Purdue we do it every other year. Some schools do it every year. But we they just invite anybody who wants to come back to come back. We'll usually get, oh gosh, I think the last time we got over 600 back for
Wow.
alumni band.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, well, we usually march close to 400.
Okay.
So, so you think about how many people graduate every year, and the alumni base is pretty big.
Right.
And it's, we love to come back. Not
Sure.
a lot of people will come back and some don't march, but
Right.
we'll throw a lot of people out on the field. Usually we march with the undergraduate band.
Mm,
It's kind of varied over the years. Sometimes we've had the field to ourselves, and sometimes we've marched with them. Lately, we've been marching with them,
right.
and that's good. It's just fun to be back out on the field,
Sure.
and but it's it's homecoming,
Yeah.
so we spend a lot of time just hanging out. Yeah, we'll practice, and we don't want to look like complete idiots on the field, but really it's homecoming weekend, and we're all catching up.
Yeah, that's super fun. Oh my goodness. So, if there's someone sort of in the recent past that sort of blew you away, who you met in the sports world, who was that,
Oh my
and
gosh.
why? Okay, I know. Okay, I know, but give me a couple.
Let me see. It's actually unrelated to my job. I got to meet Walter Payton,
Oh,
and who was my childhood hero.
yeah.
And I have an autographed Super Bowl 20 poster of his with his autograph on it. That, when the time comes that I've got nothing left and I'm pushing my worldly possessions around in a shopping cart, that will still be in the shopping cart. Um, and that
Yeah.
could be October.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Okay.
so gosh, but I meet a lot of the big name coaches.
Sure.
I get to meet some of the great players.
Yeah.
One of the more interesting guys. This isn't going to maybe blow anybody away, but Joakim Noah, who played for the Bulls,
Mhm.
but the University of Florida, and they won back-to-back national championships, and he was on those teams.
Right.
And that was a really unique guy who, one of those guys that would say whatever comes to his mind, didn't have much of a filter between the brain and his mouth. But and some of those guys are who don't have that filter say some really stupid things. But Joakim Noah was a really smart, thoughtful guy,
Right.
really wired differently than a lot of people, and I just found him to be a really interesting person to listen to or to speak to.
Yeah. And since we're in the middle of a pandemic and it's obviously affected your world completely and your job and stuff, it's like, how do you predict the future there at all with what's going on,
That's funny. That's kind of my job, right?
I know. Yeah.
Short-term future on the
Yeah.
court.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard,
Yeah.
because you might think you have a handle on what's coming, and then something happens that
Yeah.
nobody foresaw, which has basically been the last 4 months.
Yeah.
Something happens that nobody foresaw,
Mhm.
and you have to adjust on the fly. So it's hard. I'm trying to predict who's going to make the postseason of football. We don't even know that we're going to have a football season.
Right.
And people are already adjusting schedules, and
Mhm.
the standards for playing in the postseason in college football are going to have to change, but they haven't yet.
Right.
Uh, so some of the smaller schools have already canceled their seasons entirely.
Wow.
So we're gonna, you don't know what to expect, and probably until we get a much better handle on this virus, either through a vaccine or reliable treatment,
Yeah.
it's going to be hard to rely on anything. We're
Yeah.
starting to see pro sports, but colleges are different because colleges have got a bigger community than just their athletes, right? So
Right.
it's hard to say our campus is not safe for students, but it's okay for the athletes. Uh,
Right.
Now, some people will make the argument, and it's not an entirely invalid argument, that if the entire student population is there, but just the athletes are there, it's kind of like a bubble, right?
Right.
So maybe they're safer if they're there when the general student population is not, but it's hard to socially distance on a football field, right? I
Yeah.
mean, these
Right.
guys are in each other's faces,
Yeah.
in practice and
Absolutely.
in games,
Yeah.
and it's gonna be
Yeah.
really hard. Uh, it's a tough problem. It's a tough societal problem, and every aspect of society is impacted,
Yeah.
and certainly college athletics is part of that. But for college football, for big time college football, for those the Power 5 conference schools, and even some of the Group of 5 schools, like in the MAC, the Ball States of the world,
Right.
they depend so much on the revenue from football and in
Uh,
TV revenue,
Right.
attendance, which, even if they get the TV revenue, attendance may not happen this year. Concessions, the communities around those schools, the restaurants and the hotels depend so much on this. This is a huge economic thing in college towns and on college campuses. And if we don't get college football in the 2021 academic year in some form or fashion, it's going to be devastating to college athletics as we know it, because the money's not going to be there to support what they do. They're not going to be able to live the way they do. This big arms race that they have, especially at the higher levels and especially in football, boy, it's going to be tough to sustain that. There's a lot of money out there, but there's not a lot of margin out there.
Right. No, that makes sense. Thanks for sharing that with everybody, because I think everybody, we're talking about so many things, right, in this world we're in right now, and talking about that, and sports are important to people, and it's,
Well, they're important to me. I mean,
yeah,
and not just,
yeah,
not just, as a job. I mean, obviously it's important in that way, but it's,
yeah,
it's a primary source of entertainment and relaxation and getting away from the stresses of life.
yeah, absolutely. And the economies that it supports and so many people's livelihoods, like you were just talking, it's an important thing for sure. Gosh, thank you again for sharing that. That's nice to have some an opinion from someone who's working in the industry, for sure. I wanted to ask you also, sort of, you've shared a lot about sort of some moments, and I was thinking, you've been in this industry a long time, and you've seen so many things. Is there any other thing that's really sort of like blown you away, or sort of seated you here in this moment and where you are right now? I know we've talked about,
The funny thing, just for me personally, was
yeah,
losing my job. When I lost my job in 2002,
right,
I mean, that was a devastating thing for me because I got downsized. We got bought by one bank too many. And
okay,
at that time, I was working for bankers. We were bought by what I call Bankzilla.
mm,
And they just took the unit I was working on and moved them to Charlotte and said, yeah, we're not going to take you guys. And that's, a month after a great review, a day after I bought a car to commute to work.
oh gosh,
So,
yeah,
and so that, I mean, it was emotionally devastating.
yeah,
Um, but, I had a month to kind of gather myself and think about what I wanted to do. And it gave me an opportunity to turn my hobby into a job
yeah,
and, lead me to where I am now. But, in that moment, it's, I wasn't really, I was kind of shell shocked. I
yeah,
didn't, I got downsized in my first job too, but that was different. I kind of saw, some writing on the wall. This was a
right,
total blindside. And,
yeah,
um, so, being able to roll with that punch eventually, really changed me in a lot of ways,
yeah,
and gave me confidence to deal with hopefully some similar situations again. Not that I'm really looking forward to a similar situation, but
yeah,
life
right,
throws you punches, so
yeah.
you got to roll with them.
Absolutely. I know. It's about making a lot of lemonade out of lemons, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was thinking chicken salad out of chicken dutes, but yeah, we'll go with your analogy.
I like that one too. Yeah. I know. I think for me as well, it's like, when people are like, what are your greatest failure, or, failures and stuff.
Yeah,
And I don't see them that way. I mean, in the moment, like, I think I had that happen as well. And in the moment, you're just like, what the am I going to do?
right.
And
Yep.
then hopefully you get innovative, and then like we go after something that's a passion of yours and create it into a business that gets bought, and all that stuff.
Yeah. Right. Well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I never saw that coming, really, but it was a path that was worth trying at that point.
Yeah. If you have any advice for sort of the young folks coming up and going after their entrepreneurship and all of that stuff, do you have any a piece of wisdom that you wish you knew when you kind of started things back in the day?
I don't know about wish I knew, but like I said, I'm a terrible self promoter.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I'm good at is saying yes.
Mm-hmm.
So people would throw opportunities at me, and sometimes I would wonder what the value in it was.
Right.
Some were more obviously valuable than others.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, well, how would you like to write this thing for us? Yes. How would you like to come on the radio? Yes. Even student radio stations. Yes. Sure. Whatever. It's helping them. It's helping me. Um, and I just found that, when people would open doors for me, I found it useful to walk through, even if I was only walking through for a short period of time. Or it's like when CBS comes along and I'm walking through into, a career, or a bigger job, I suppose. You
Yeah.
know, I just found that saying yes, um, you may end up regretting a few of those yeses, but that's okay. You know, that's when you say no, you become unapproachable, and
Right.
people don't like hearing no, and then they turn you off. When you say yes, you know that opportunity may not have been the greatest thing, or it may have just been a minor thing, but people warm up to you when you say yes, and they turn you away when you say no. So I just found myself saying yes a lot, and it worked out pretty well.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying yes for doing this. Ah.
uh, this is a no-brainer.
Yeah. Well, good. Yay. I know, it's great. It's so cool talking to you. It's so fascinating to me. Like, I love I mean, it is the tech, the art, the artistry of it all. And then do you have, as far as like sort of, seems like you got to know a lot about psychology and how people think as well too. Where did
You
that come
do.
from?
Yeah. Um, I didn't take a class. Well, I did take a psych class, but I mean, it was,
Well, we all did, but
yeah, no,
yeah,
I just, um, I just think it must be somewhat innate.
yeah.
I'm not going to say I'm the best at reading people, but
Mhm.
I'm pretty good at thinking things through.
Sure.
So, you know, when I'm good at anticipating problems, not perfect, maybe not great, but
Mhm.
pretty good at anticipating problems
Right.
in areas where I have some knowledge. So when the BCS first started out and they had this formula and they were going to use that formula to predict teams,
Mhm.
I could see where it was going to fail. And then, of course, it fail eventually, and then of course it would fail a lot quicker than anybody thought. And then they change a formula, knee-jerk reaction. No, they're still not thinking of this, or still not thinking of this. So that sort of thing is something that I've always been
Mhm.
pretty good at.
Right.
Kind of looking not into the way future, but into the near future, and seeing anticipating where problems are going to crop up.
Right.
And so that I've been able to write about things like that,
Mhm.
and sometimes kind of show somebody where the problems might be, whether they listen to me or not.
Right. Right.
But that's and really more often not, but that's okay.
Yeah. Are there other people like you that do what you do?
There are people who do bits and pieces of what I do. Nobody
Yeah.
does everything that I do.
Uh,
Nobody does the numbers. Nobody does both sports.
okay. Yeah.
Nobody does all of what I do.
Yeah.
But there are people who do bits and pieces of what I do.
Got it. All right. Jerry Palm, unique.
Yeah, for what that's worth.
Yeah, we're all unique and special in our own ways, but that's super cool that you've created a niche for yourself that is very much who you are and what you bring to the table. That's super cool.
Certainly wasn't what I grew up expecting to be.
Right? What did you expect
Nobody's
to be? What did you expect to
computer
be?
geek. I was
Yeah.
going to be
Okay.
programmer, sure. Yeah. It's funny. I had an English teacher in high school who read me the Riot Act one time, and now that I'm actually a professional writer, is probably doing laps, in his grave. I mean, just the thought that I would have ever been a professional writer in the mind of this guy. I hated English in high school. And
Okay.
so, I could have been a straight A student, but I didn't like what they forced me to write about, and I didn't put my heart into it.
Right.
And one time this guy just read me the Riot Act, and I gave him a paper that was a C. It was easily a C.
Mhm.
And you're better than this, and I'm not going to put up with any of this. And the kind of stuff you couldn't possibly do as a teacher now.
Right.
And he kind of went all Bobby Knight on me. He basically said, anything that you give me from this point is either going to be an A or an F, and I'll be able to tell. It's like, oh, okay then. So I ended
Wow.
up with a B in the class, but but it's funny because it really, in a way, it kind of taught me about applying yourself in all situations, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
and it was a good lesson to learn in high school, because I would have totally bombed out at Purdue if I hadn't learned it by then.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a good teacher right there. There's a lot of good teachers in the Midwest. For
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, but like I said, that a particular approach probably would get
Yeah.
you suspended these days.
Yeah. Potentially. Yeah. Yeah. They have to take it down a notch a little bit on that kind of thing for sure. So that's awesome. Well, Jerry, thank you so much. It's such a delight talking to you.
Well,
Yay.
thanks for having me on. This has been fun.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, everyone, so where can everybody find you out on the interwebs?
CBSSports.com is where my writing is, and the college football and basketball pages. It's a little bit more college football these days, but
Yep.
this is typically my off season. From
Okay.
the end of the basketball tournament until about now, I
Mhm.
don't do much of anything. And then I work pretty much every day, at least a little bit, from,
Yeah,
the week before Labor Day all the way through
right,
the Final Four. The only day I get fully off is Christmas. But
right.
but yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at JPPalmCBS. I'm on Facebook. I
Okay.
don't do much Instagramming, but Twitter is where most people berate me about my work. I have like 45,000 followers, and pretty much all of them hate me at one level or another. So every job I've ever had, Heather, has been, you're expected to be perfect and improve from there.
That's true. The bar is
Yeah. I was a payroll programmer. I've been a referee and an umpire, and now I'm a sports columnist paid to have an opinion. So, it's thick
yeah.
skin jobs.
Yeah, got it. That's awesome. Well, we'll put that stuff in the show notes so everybody can find you and berate you. And
Yes.
listeners, you better not berate him. You say hi to Jerry, please. But yeah, it's awesome. Well, again, thank you for your time, and it's so great to have you on the show. And it's been fascinating talking to you about your job. So thank you for that.
All right. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, Jerry. Awesome. Well, everybody, that has been another episode of the Mavens Do It Better podcast. And here is to another beautiful day on this blue spinning sphere. Thanks.